You're lying in bed. The room is quiet, soft with shadows, lit only by the final flicker of firelight. The sounds of the street have gone to sleep. There's the creak of your mattress, the rustle of a quilt. And just before you close your eyes, you slip a pair of scissors beneath your pillow. You don't do it out of forgetfulness. You don't do it to keep them safe from a child. You do it because, well, you were told to. Maybe by your mother, or your grandmother, or the midwife down the lane with a gray shawl and sharp eyes. Someone told you, once, that sleeping with scissors, closed tight, iron blades crossed, tucked under your pillowcase, was the only way to keep nightmares away. Or sickness. Or witches. That part depends on where you live. Because here's the strange thing. In 1870, people all across rural Europe, and even pockets of America, believed this. Not just one village. Not just one family. But dozens. Hundreds. Maybe thousands. They slept with iron shears beneath their pillows like it was as natural as brushing their teeth. Or saying a prayer. And no one talked much about why. It was just something you did. Something that had always been done. A quiet, sharp charm between your head and the bed frame. Tonight, we're going to explore that. Slowly, sleepily. Not to solve it, because strange things don't always want solving, but to let the idea unfold. Why did people sleep with scissors under their pillows? What were they afraid of? What did they believe those blades were doing while they slept? And why did the tradition linger so long? Not just in faraway hills or whispering woodlands, but in houses like yours. Quiet houses. Ordinary ones. Ones that creak and sigh and settle at night. Just like this one. Let's go back. Not just to 1870, but further. Before electricity. Before pasteurized milk. Before germ theory was widely accepted. Back to a time when nightfall wasn't a pause. It was a danger. When people feared what came through keyholes and cracks in the shutters. The kind of fears you couldn't always name. In many households, scissors weren't just a tool. They were a talisman. A simple object made of iron. A material believed to be powerful, even sacred. Not because of how it cut fabric, but because of how it cut through other things. Invisible things. Stories passed down and whispers told of evil spirits, witches, nightmares that could choke a person mid-sleep. And if you lived in a farmhouse miles from the nearest doctor, miles from a town with a constable or priest, you relied on what you had. Iron. Ritual. Habit. A pair of scissors tucked under your pillow was like drawing a line across the dream world, saying, not tonight. Not here. And so, people slept. Not always peacefully, but at least with something between them and the dark. Of course, the practice didn't start in 1870. It's much older. Some folklorists trace it back to ancient Rome, others to Norse legend. There are stories of shears being used in burial rituals, in wedding customs, even in childbirth, when midwives would place open scissors under the bed to ward off evil during delivery. Sometimes, the scissors weren't just placed under a pillow, but hung above a cradle, blades open in an X, a shape thought to repel misfortune, a symbol of warning. It was never about cutting something physical. It was about boundaries, the kind you couldn't see, the kind you made anyway. And by 1870, even as gaslight crept into cities and railroads stitched the countryside tighter, people still believed. Maybe not always loudly, maybe not even consciously, but enough to keep placing those scissors where the dreams couldn't reach them. So tonight, we'll walk through that world. We'll visit the bedrooms and kitchens of people who followed these old customs. We'll hear the wind through crooked chimneys. We'll watch the flame of a candle tremble at midnight. We'll meet the kinds of people who pass down these rituals, not in books, but through gesture, through warning, through repetition. Because when you live in a time before antibiotics, before locks on every door, before light bulbs, you find comfort wherever you can. Even if it's in the cold iron of a pair of scissors. Even if no one quite remembers why. Let's sit with this idea a moment longer. Iron. A material so ordinary now that we barely notice it. But for centuries, it was anything but ordinary. Iron had weight, meaning, power. People didn't just forge it, they believed in it. In 1870, if you lived in a country cottage on the edge of a fading village, Iron was part of your world in quiet, comforting ways. The fire poker leaning beside the hearth, the latch on the door, the heavy key you kept tied on a string, and, perhaps most memorably, the pair of scissors you kept near your pillow. Because iron, unlike wood, or cloth, or even silver, was known for its strength. But more than that, people thought it could protect. Not in the way we think of protection now. Not locked doors or alarm bells, but spiritual protection, invisible armor, a force that disrupted evil things. All across rural Europe, people told stories about the power of cold iron. That's what they called it, cold iron. The kind that hadn't been enchanted or cursed or softened. Just plain, honest metal from the earth, pulled from deep below and hammered into something useful. And that usefulness, that's what made it magical. You see, in folklore, the most protective things weren't flashy or rare. They were humble, familiar, grounded, and iron was always close by. Some believed that spirits, especially mischievous ones like fairies or goblins, couldn't cross iron, that they feared it, that it repelled them like garlic to a vampire. Others said witches, real or imagined, couldn't bear to touch it, that they'd recoil from a horseshoe nailed above a door, that a ring of iron could stop them mid-caress, that an iron blade beneath your bed could block them from slipping into your dreams. So imagine being a mother in a farmhouse in 1870. Your child sleeps fitfully. You've heard odd things lately. Cows spooked, eggs spoiled, strange marks on the doorstep. You don't call a doctor. There isn't one nearby. You don't write a letter. There's no time. Instead, you reach for what your grandmother once reached for. The old shears. Heavy, cold, stained, perhaps, but faithful. And you slide them under the pillow, just in case. It wasn't always about fear, either. Sometimes, iron was used for joy, for safety during childbirth, for protection at weddings, for guarding a newborn from being taken by something unseen. Midwives had their own quiet rituals. Some would hold an iron knife under the bed. Others would place iron keys near the mother's feet. And often, a pair of scissors, open, like a cross, would rest somewhere close. It didn't matter if you truly believed. It mattered that you acted like you did. Because belief, in those days, wasn't about certainty. It was about tradition, about passing down small gestures that gave shape to the world. And iron, useful, unpretentious iron, fit perfectly into that world. Even in America, these ideas traveled. Immigrants brought them from Germany, Ireland, Wales. They crossed oceans with trunks full of woolen tools, and tucked between those things were memories, stories, habits. In some places, you'd find scissors beneath pillows. In others, a small horseshoe under the bed. And always, the understanding that metal, especially cold iron, could do something the mind couldn't quite explain. Of course, the rational thinkers of the day scoffed at all this. Doctors dismissed it. Ministers warned against it. Scientists shrugged. But the scissors stayed. Because in a time when people had so few tools against the unknown, even an old pair of shears could feel like a shield. And maybe they still do. Maybe that's why some of us feel comforted by the weight of keys in our pocket. Or why we keep certain objects near us without really knowing why. Maybe we've inherited something older than memory. A quiet belief in protection. A small, iron kind of faith. Let's step into the dark now. The house is quiet. The fire has burned low. The shutters creak softly against the breeze. It's 1870, and the countryside at night is not peaceful in the way we might imagine. It's quiet, yes, but it's a watchful quiet. A tense one. Because in the dark, things change. Sounds take on new meanings. The familiar shape of a coat on a chair becomes something hunched and waiting. Floorboards settle like footsteps. The wind sighs like someone whispering. And people, in that time, had very real fears of what the darkness might bring. This wasn't about crime, not the kind we think of now. There weren't many people around to commit it, especially in the deep rural parts. What they feared was stranger than thieves. There were tales of changelings, witches, wandering spirits, sleep demons. Not everyone believed them, not out loud, but no one entirely dismissed them either. A baby crying at the wrong hour might mean it had been swapped. A human child taken, replaced with something other. A woman who wandered alone at night might be whispered about the next day. A bad dream, especially one that left you gasping for breath, wasn't just a nightmare. It could be a hag, sitting on your chest. People didn't always say these things in the daylight, but they acted on them just the same. That's where the scissors came in. Slipped beneath the pillow, open, like a small iron cross. Not because they were weapons, but because they were a symbol. Something about the shape, the metal, the act of placing them there. It gave people a sense of boundary, like drawing a line around the bed that nothing wicked could cross. It's easy to mock now, but we forget how loud the dark used to be. There was no hum of traffic, no glow from street lights, just the creak of your own house, the howling of a dog 2 fields away, and the stories you tried not to remember. Some said it was because iron was of the earth, stronger than magic. Others said its weight, its sharpness, made it too dangerous for spirits to cross. Still others believed iron rang when struck, and that sound alone could banish the unseen. Either way, scissors, especially heavy ones made of solid iron, carried that same protective power. But it wasn't just the material. It was also the shape. Scissors form a cross when left open. That wasn't an accident. To people living in a deeply Christian culture, the cross was the ultimate sign of protection. It marked graves. It hung above doors. It was drawn on the body in prayer. Because whether the danger was real or imagined didn't matter much in the moment. What mattered was being able to close your eyes and trust that you had done what you could. Even now, the echoes linger. We double-check the lock, leave a hallway light on, sleep facing the door. Most of us don't know why we do it. But deep down, in some quiet ancestral part of the mind, we're still trying to draw that invisible circle around our bed. Still trying to sleep inside the line, where the stories can't get in. So when you picture those scissors beneath the pillow, don't see superstition. See intention. See the quiet courage of a person trying to protect their home from whatever darkness meant to them. Not with spells, not with swords, but with the humble strength of iron. Now we know that people slept with scissors under their pillows. But why scissors? Why not a knife? Or a Bible? Or a pouch of herbs or salt like some did? Why this everyday object? This tool used for cloth and thread and parchment? It turns out the answer has as much to do with belief as it does with symbolism. And once you know what people thought scissors meant, the choice starts to make a strange kind of sense. In the 19th century, iron wasn't just a material. It was a boundary, a symbol, a line between the natural and the unnatural. Iron was believed to repel evil, and not just in folklore from one place. Versions of this idea show up across Europe, Africa, Asia. Different names, different spirits, but the same rule. Iron keeps them out. Some said it was because iron was of the earth, stronger than magic. Others said its weight, its sharpness, made it too dangerous for spirits to cross. Still others believed iron rang when struck, and that sound alone could banish the unseen. Either way, scissors, especially heavy ones made of solid iron, carried that same protective power. But it wasn't just the material. It was also the shape. Scissors form a cross when left open. That wasn't an accident. To people living in a deeply Christian culture, the cross was the ultimate sign of protection. It marked graves. It hung above doors. It was drawn on the body in prayer. So placing open scissors beneath the pillow wasn't just practical. It was symbolic. It was like saying, no further. This bed is watched. This room is marked. Even if you didn't say it aloud. And there was another layer to it still. Scissors were domestic. They belonged to the home, to the sewing kit, the kitchen drawer, the work table. They weren't weapons, and that made them powerful in a different way. This wasn't about battle. It was about safety, about drawing a circle around your small, flickering world and saying, this is mine. Think of a mother, tucking her child into bed, slipping a pair of scissors beneath the pillow, whispering something soft, half a rhyme, half a prayer. She wasn't trying to fight darkness. She was trying to outlast it. We still see this instinct today. A child clutching a stuffed animal before sleep. A grown adult checking behind a door twice, just to be sure. Tiny rituals we can't quite explain, but still perform. Scissors were that. For them, not just metal, not just sharp, but familiar. An object that had always been in their hands, and now rested beneath their heads. There's a recorded account, written in the margins of a Welsh farmer's ledger from 1872, where he describes leaving his iron shears beneath his wife's pillow during her fever. He writes, "Lest spirits draw near while she sleeps. Iron keeps them back." He doesn't say what spirits. He doesn't say if he really believed it. He just writes it down, like it's the most natural thing in the world. Because for many, it was. In the end, superstition wasn't about foolishness. It was about comfort. And comfort doesn't always come from reason. Sometimes it comes from routine. From believing the right object, in the right place, can guard the night. That's what scissors were. Not sacred, not magical, just enough. So next time you see a pair of old iron scissors in a museum or vintage shop, look again. Not just at the blades, but at the silence they once stood in. A silence filled with wind, with creaks, with stories. And somewhere, just beneath that, the hope that this little thing, this ordinary thing, might be enough to keep the dark away. To understand why someone would tuck scissors under their pillow, you need to understand what bedtime felt like in 1870. It wasn't soft electric glow and brushed cotton sheets. It wasn't white noise machines or bedside lamps. No, night was a different world entirely. Imagine this. The sun dips low. The day's heat vanishes. And the house begins to darken. Not gradually, but all at once. Candles are lit. Oil lamps, if the family can afford them. Shadows move differently now. They stretch. They creep up the walls. The corners of the room seem to deepen. Everything slows. This isn't nighttime like we know it. This is the long dark. Hours ahead without light. Without distraction. Without certainty. And in 1870, especially in rural areas, bedtime wasn't just about going to sleep. It was about preparing for the night. There were things you did. Rituals. Routines. Not always logical, but always necessary. The fire had to be banked just right. Too little, and it would go out. Too much, and it might catch the chimney. The doors were checked. Bolts drawn. The shutters fastened tight. Children said their prayers. Adults, too. But sometimes, quietly, inwardly, just enough to calm the mind. People talked about the thin hours, that strange stretch of time just before true sleep, when dreams and fears started to mix. It's when the body sinks, but the mind lingers. And it's when people said the unseen felt closest. It's when the wind might sound like a whisper. When the creak of the floor might raise a thought you'd rather not finish. No wonder people needed comfort. Something solid. Something sharp. Something real beneath the pillow. And of course, beds were different, too. Straw mattresses if you were poor. Rope-strung frames that sagged unless tightened often. Heavy quilts. Linen sheets. Cold rooms. Very few people had bedrooms the way we imagine them now. Often, several people slept in the same space. Sometimes the same bed. Children curled up beside siblings. Older relatives in the corner near the fire. Privacy was a luxury, but ritual, that belonged to everyone. Some families left out bowls of salt. Others placed a broom across the threshold. A few would even hang garlic by the bedpost, not just for vampires, but for fever and bad luck. Still others turned their shoes upside down before bed. Each object had a story, a reason. A whispered logic passed from mother to child, from grandfather to grandchild. You didn't have to know why it worked. You just had to do it. And if the scissors weren't under the pillow, well, maybe that was the night you didn't sleep as soundly. This was a world where most people still believed in things that hovered. Not ghosts, exactly. Not demons, not quite. But feelings. That the dark might hold. Something. Not a monster under the bed, but a presence. A pressure in the room. So you had to prepare. Just like you'd prepare for a storm. Or birth. Or guest. And let's not forget, this was a time when people died at home. Slept in the same beds where generations had lived and passed. Death wasn't hidden. It was folded into life. So were illness, fever, coughing fits in the night. Parents would watch their children sleep, one eye open, listening for change in breath. Lovers kept hands clasped beneath blankets, not for romance, but for reassurance. That's what bedtime held. All of it. Love, fear, silence, superstition, survival. And yet, through all of that, people did what they had to do. They slipped between rough sheets, blew out the candle, felt the cool of the iron scissors beneath the pillow, closed their eyes, and let the dark do what it would. Because maybe that's what ritual is, in the end. A way to say, I've done all I can. Now I rest. And in 1870, with the shutters drawn and the hearth faintly glowing, rest was an act of quiet courage. So, why scissors? Why not a Bible, or a bell, or a lucky coin? Why something sharp? Why metal? Why iron? To understand that, we have to go much further back, centuries before 1870, even. Back to when people didn't separate the world into natural and supernatural. It was all one thing. An iron. Iron meant something. In old European folk belief, especially among the British, Scots, Irish, and Germanic traditions, iron was powerful. Not just useful, not just for tools, but spiritually potent. It was thought to repel witches, to drive off fae, to frighten evil spirits. Blacksmiths, those who shaped iron, were seen as half magician, half sorcerer in some villages. They worked with fire, with force, and the tools they made, plowshares, nails, scissors, horseshoes, were believed to carry protective energy. One common practice, placing iron shears under a newborn baby's cradle. To keep away changelings, fairy imposters said to swap places with real children. In fact, across much of Europe, people believed that cold iron had the power to cut through enchantment. And a pair of open scissors, well, that was even better, because they looked like a cross. Two blades spread wide, forming an X or plus shape. Symbolic, protective, defensive, like a sword left unsheathed at your bedside. And so the habit grew. Superstition is sticky. It travels quietly, folded into ordinary things. No one wrote down the exact moment someone tucked scissors beneath a pillow. But in homes across England, Ireland, Wales, and eventually rural America, the tradition lingered, especially among communities that had less access to medicine, fewer locks on doors, and more belief in what couldn't be seen. Some versions of the belief warned that nightmares were caused by spirits pressing on the chest, what we now call sleep paralysis. The fix: a pair of iron scissors under the pillow. Some said it had to be open. Others insisted closed was safer. Still others tied a red string around the handle for extra protection. There was no unified rulebook, just inherited memory. The way your grandmother might have said, "Don't sleep with your feet uncovered. Never leave your shoes pointing toward the door." Oh, tuck scissors under your pillow, just in case. What's fascinating is how ordinary objects carried such extraordinary weight. A broom might sweep away evil. A mirror might trap a wandering soul. Salt could block bad luck. And scissors, simple, useful scissors, became a kind of ward. In African American communities, especially in the South, iron objects also held protective power. Horseshoes were nailed above doors. Railroad spikes were buried at corners of homes. Scissors might be used to cut curses away, symbolically snipping ties to bad energy. And in Appalachia, a rich mix of Scots-Irish, Native American, and African folk wisdom blended into powerful traditions. There, too, scissors were often placed near the bed, especially if a child was ill, or a bad dream had come 2 nights in a row. No one questioned it. It was just what you did. And then, consider the time period. In 1870, America was in a strange in-between moment. The Civil War had just ended. Industry was growing. Science was on the rise. But so was spiritualism. Seances, ghost stories, a fascination with the afterlife. People straddled the line between reason and belief. You could read Darwin in the morning and still throw salt over your shoulder by nightfall. Scissors under the pillow. Why not? What harm could it do? And what if it worked? What makes these beliefs powerful isn't whether they are provable. It's how they get passed along. From mouth to ear. From house to house. Quietly. Unquestioned. Until suddenly, one day, you find yourself folding your nightshirt, fluffing your pillow, and reaching for that familiar cool shape, just in case. Because the truth is, people have always wanted to feel safe while they sleep. And if a pair of scissors, humble, sharp, old-fashioned, could promise that, that was enough. You didn't need to understand the magic. You only needed to believe it might be there. Now, let's take a quiet step away from folklore. What if the scissors weren't just for ghosts or witches or dreams? What if they were practical, ordinary, dangerous in all the right ways? Because while some folks slept with scissors for protection against spirits, others simply feared something more real. People. In 1870, most rural homes didn't have locks. Not good ones, at least. A latch, a hook, a piece of string looped around a nail. These were your defenses. So if someone tried the door in the night, there wasn't much stopping them. You might not have had a gun, or wanted to use one, but a sharp pair of scissors. That you could keep close, hidden under your pillow, cool and reassuring. An object with weight, with purpose. And it wasn't just intruders. Imagine your mother in a cramped log cabin. Your baby's crib is beside you. The oil lamp flickers. A fever's rising. Or a cough won't stop. Maybe you need to trim a cloth for compresses. Cut a clean strip from an old shirt. Snip a thread. It's the middle of the night. You don't want to fumble around in the dark. So you keep the scissors under your pillow. Right there. Within reach. It sounds strange today. Maybe even risky. But back then, bedtime wasn't a luxury. It was a station. A place you stayed unless something went wrong. And when something did go wrong, you didn't want to get up. You wanted tools nearby. Quiet tools. Useful tools. Scissors weren't just for sewing. They were for fixing things. Bandages. Splinters. Patches. Paper. Food. A pocket knife might do. But scissors were safer for children and lighter for women. Now, consider this. What if you were afraid of night terrors? Not spirits. Not witches. But your own hands. Your own mind. Some 19th century doctors recorded cases of sleepwalking, restlessness, even screaming fits in the dark. People feared what they might do without meaning to. And one folk remedy: place a pair of open scissors near the head. Not to be used, but to serve as a symbol. Sharp things were thought to cut through nightmares, to sever them before they took hold. Almost like a psychological boundary, a visible object of reassurance. Even if you never touched them, they were there, and that helped. Then, there's one more angle. A darker one. Some women kept scissors nearby. For protection. Not from spirits. Not from burglars. But from men. In boarding houses. In shared rooms. In marriages they didn't feel safe in. There's quiet evidence, tucked between journal entries and secondhand stories, that some women used scissors as a final line of defense. Not a weapon, exactly, but a symbol. A message. You can't take everything. Of course, accidents happened. There are old warnings and letters in newspapers. Don't sleep with open scissors. Child injured by shears left in bed. But the practice didn't stop. Because what it offered, peace of mind, however symbolic, was worth the risk. Some traditions are written down in books. Others, whispered from one tired voice to another, just before bed. That's how a lot of this lived on. Not in medical journals or church records, but in bedside stories. And those stories mattered. More than facts. More than warnings. Because once something is tied to your grandmother's voice, it becomes a kind of truth. In many homes, especially in rural America and the British countryside, the scissors under the pillow habit didn't come with explanation. It came with repetition. A girl might ask, "Why do you keep those shears under there?" And the mother might shrug, "Because my mother did." That was reason enough. A few oral histories from the late 19th and early 20th centuries record these hammer-down habits. Granny said it keeps the night hag away. Ma always said if you had bad dreams, put something sharp near your head. We kept them there when Daddy was out, just in case. You sleep better with something real nearby. The phrasing changed, but the sentiment, steady, rooted. Scissors weren't just tools. They were anchors. In some families, the practice evolved. Sometimes the scissors were wrapped in cloth, sometimes tied shut with string. sometimes placed under the mattress instead of the pillow. Close, but safe. In households with children, a parent might hide them under their own bedding, or hang them on a nail just above the headboard. The key was in the exact spot. It was the presence, knowing they were there. And not everyone used scissors. Some substituted with other sharp objects. A pin, a needle, a knife turned inward. It varied by region, by fear, by folktale, but the idea was consistent. Sharp things guard soft minds. Even in the early 1900s, long after gas lamps replaced candles, and locks became sturdier, some elders still insisted, leave the shears nearby. Some wouldn't sleep unless they could feel the shape of them through the pillow. Others kept them in little pouches, like a ritual. This wasn't always about danger. Sometimes, it was habitual comfort, like a child with a blanket, or an adult with a ticking clock. The mind grew used to it, and that made it peaceful. Modern historians occasionally stumble across references in letters, especially between mothers and daughters. Lines like, "Don't forget to pack the good scissors for your trip. Keep them close by at night. I brought the travel pair. Can't sleep without 'em." No fanfare, no footnotes, just a quiet assumption that sleep needed tools. And for some, it never left. Even as beliefs about spirits faded, even as people grew skeptical of old superstitions. Still, there were those who confessed, "I know it's silly, but I sleep better with them there." They didn't know why, didn't need to, because comfort isn't always rational. It's inherited. It's worn smooth by time. So what does that tell us? That not all rituals are religious. Not all habits are explainable. Sometimes, they are ancestral echoes. Not commands, just whispers. Place the scissors under your pillow. You'll rest easier, just in case. And so they did. And maybe, one day, someone asked you why you do it. And you said, "I don't know. It just helps." And that was that. Because in the end, it's not about the object. It's about the belief tucked into it, and the quiet trust that whatever haunted your people before won't haunt you tonight. By the 1870s, religion touched nearly every part of daily life. From mealtime to moonrise, scripture was part of the rhythm, and the bedroom, soft, still, and dimly lit, was no exception. But the lines between faith and folklore were often blurred. You might see a Bible on the nightstand, and scissors under the pillow, and to the person sleeping there, both were equal protection. Many families believed in the power of spoken verses. Lines from the book of Psalms were common. "I will both lay me down in peace, and sleep. For thou, Lord, only makest me dwell in safety." Psalm 4 verse 8. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" Psalm 27 verse 1. "He shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all thy ways." Psalm 91 verse 11. These weren't recited in church tone. They were murmured into feather pillows. Half prayer, half lullaby. Some even wrote them down, scribbled in margins, on scraps of linen, or pasted inside drawers. In certain households, these verses were tucked beneath the mattress, alongside a piece of dried lavender. Oh yes, a pair of small shears. The symbolism became layered. Steel for the body, scripture for the soul. Was this encouraged by the church? Not officially. Many clergy in the 19th century preached against superstitions. They warned congregants not to elevate objects or rituals above faith. But in the home, especially rural homes far from clergy eyes, spiritual blending happened anyway. The scissors didn't compete with the Word of God. They accompanied it. Protection came from all directions. Some even believed the shape of scissors echoed across when opened, two blades intersecting like sacred geometry. Others thought the sound they made when opened and closed could cut through evil. This wasn't doctrine. It was domestic theology, practical belief shaped by practice. Households would develop their own small rituals. A few examples passed down in letters and journals. Opening the scissors 3 times before bed, silently, laying them atop a folded nightdress with a cross of pins, or wrapping them in white cloth marked with a stitched verse. Not because they read it in a book, because someone older had done it first. This mixture of textile, steel, and scripture created a kind of invisible armor. A mother might say to her child, Sleep well. The angels are watching, and the shears are sharp. To us, that sounds odd. But in that time, it was tenderness, a way to make sense of invisible fears, to prepare for the unknown night. And let's not forget how gender played into it. Women, especially mothers and grandmothers, were often the keepers of both the faith and the fears of the home. They were the ones who folded the sheets, lit the candle, turned down the bed, whispered the psalm, placed the scissors. Their religion wasn't loud. It was folded into the linens, sewn into the seams. One 1871 diary entry from a farm wife in Vermont reads, "I woke at 3, heart troubled, repeated Psalm 121 and touched the shears. Slept again without faith." That sentence holds centuries of belief. Personal, humble, unseen. To historians today, this blending of the Bible and blade might seem contradictory. But to the people of 1870, it was harmonious. A holy safety net. You guarded your soul with prayer, your dreams with psalms, and your bed with scissors. Just in case. Because faith isn't always what's preached. Sometimes, it's what's practiced, repeated, passed down, held in the hand, cold and real. And sometimes, that faith is shaped like steel. Of course, not every night passed in quiet peace. And not every charm worked the way people hoped. Even in 1870, with psalms whispered and scissors in place, some still woke up shaken, with dreams they couldn't explain. Or worse, things they believed weren't dreams at all. Because in every tradition, there are stories of when the ritual failed. In towns from Pennsylvania to Tennessee, newspapers and local lore alike carried quiet, eerie tales. A child waking with long scratches across their legs. A man whose scissors were found across the room by morning. A widow whose nightly prayers were interrupted by a knocking that no one else heard. And the people told these stories not to scare, but to warn that the night was still wild. And protection, while helpful, was never perfect. One tale comes from a letter written in 1873 from a teacher in upstate New York. Mrs. Daltrey said her youngest girl screamed just after midnight. Said she saw a dark face in the ceiling beams. The scissors were under the pillow, but unopened. That, she said, was the mistake. There were rules, you see, unspoken ones. The scissors must be sharp. They must be opened, not closed. They must point toward the door, or evil could enter. And they must not be touched by someone with impure intentions. People believe these details mattered. Miss one, and your defenses might crumble. Leave them closed. You've locked nothing out. Leave them dusty. They lose their edge, spiritually as well as physically. A cracked handle could invite misfortune. A rusted hinge might let something slip through. They weren't tools anymore. They were boundaries. Another case involved a traveling preacher who mocked the practice in a public sermon. He said, "If scissors could guard the soul, I'd sell mine at the altar." Later that week, his horse threw him into a creek bed. He broke his collarbone. Coincidence? Perhaps. But by the following Sunday, half his congregation had returned to their scissor charms. Just in case. And sometimes the stories got darker. In Kentucky, a woman was said to have used scissors not just for protection, but to draw blood, a drop on the window pane to keep spirits at bay. Some claimed that crossed the line. That ritual turned to magic, and magic brought consequences. One winter, her house caught fire. Only the bedroom remained untouched. They found the scissors, still on the bed. Open, blackened but whole. No one ever proved how the fire started. Stories like these weren't just gossip. They were memory armor, warnings woven into family lore. Don't scoff at the old ways. Don't forget the scissors. Don't skip the song. Don't point them at someone you love. Because even protection can backfire when misused. And so, new rituals formed to double the shield. Some tied red thread around the handles. Others placed a slice of garlic beneath the scissors. A few even began keeping 2 pairs, one under each pillow. Not because it looked smart, but because it felt safer. Because if one line of defense didn't hold, maybe the second would. These tales didn't always make the papers, but they made the rounds over porches, back fences, and dinner tables. Softly told, half believed, but never entirely dismissed. Even the skeptics rarely slept with their backs to the open door. And while modern listeners might roll their eyes, laugh at these old charms and whispered warnings, they weren't afraid of being wrong. They were afraid of not being ready, just in case. Because the scissors weren't just a symbol. They were a promise. And every promise carries a risk. That it might break. That it might not be enough. That the night might still get in. And when it does, you'll wish you'd remembered the rules. By the late 19th century, America was changing fast. Railroads stitched the land together. Electric lights flickered in storefronts. Pharmacies replaced herbalists. And doctors began prescribing more pills than prayers. But in quiet homes, especially in rural towns and older neighborhoods, the scissors remained. Tucked beneath pillows, hung above baby cribs, slipped discreetly into traveling satchels, sometimes placed inside coffins, not out of fear, but out of habit, an inheritance. This was no longer about witches or spirits. Exactly. Not for everyone. For some, the sharp iron under the feather ticking was just part of the routine. Like locking the door, or leaving a lamp burning low. You might not believe in burglars, but you still turn the key, just in case. Grandmothers passed the tradition to daughters. No lectures, no explanations, just quiet gestures. A set of shears laid gently in a linen drawer. A reminder, murmured once at bedtime. Keep them open, always pointing north. When asked why, they'd say, "That's how my mother did it." And when their children asked if it worked, they'd shrug and say, "We're still here, aren't we?" In that way, the scissors became heirlooms. Not just objects, but carriers of memory, of stories only half told. You could find them wrapped in silk handkerchiefs, engraved with initials, kept beside Bibles, or tucked behind loose bricks in fireplaces. Some scissors grew more ornate. Decorative handles, chased metal, even etched blades. But most remained plain. Iron. Simple. Functional. Trusted. The kind you could sharpen on a stone outback. The kind that snipped fabric for dresses, thread for quilting, or roots for the garden. It wasn't always about evil. Sometimes, the scissors simply represented control. In a world full of unknowns. Weather, illness, news from faraway wars. This one thing, this tiny act of folding steel beneath a pillow, was something you could decide for yourself. And when a child asked, "But what are they for?" the answer might be, for cutting nightmares, for keeping the bad thoughts away, for slicing the air if it gets too heavy, for remembering who we are. Because superstition, when lived long enough, becomes culture, and culture, when quiet and personal, becomes something even stronger. Ritual. Even the skeptics kept them, not loudly, not with ceremony, but with a soft, unspoken nod to the past. A blacksmith in Missouri, born in 1892, once wrote in his journal, "Never believed the stories, but I kept a pair under the bed all the same. They were my ma's. Made me feel like the world wasn't all wild." That was the thing. The scissors didn't make sense. They didn't need to. They simply made space. For calm, for order, for rest. You could say they were a comfort object, like a blanket or bedtime story, but with an edge, with weight, heavy enough to remind you that people survived worse nights than this. That steel had a memory, and yours was part of it. By 1900, you'd find fewer people talking about the practice openly. Doctors had new theories. Psychologists wrote long papers about nighttime anxieties and rituals. But still, the scissors turned up. In estate inventories, in old cedar chests, between the pages of handwritten cookbooks, and always under pillows, sometimes right up until death. Because for all our progress and reason, some part of us clings to the tools that once kept the dark at bay. The world got louder, faster, brighter, but sleep still came slowly, and dreams still crept in. And sometimes, even the bravest minds need something small, cold, and sharp nearby, to mark the boundary between day and night. Not to fight the darkness, not to explain it, just to say, "I see you, but not tonight." And then, to sleep. We like to imagine the past as a louder place. Clanging bells, horse hooves, blacksmith hammers, voices rising across fields or through open windows. But the truth is, Most of history was quiet, especially at night, especially in the bedroom, especially when fear crept in, not loud like thunder, but slow and soft, like fog curling at the foot of the bed. That's where the scissors lived, not in museums, or textbooks, or headlines, but tucked beneath linen, warmed by breath and body, forgotten until night came again. There were no speeches about them, no ceremonies, just stillness, just steel, just sleep. In 1870, the world was tipping forward, toward cities, wires, telegrams, and electric ideas. But in the middle of all that progress, people still play scissors under their pillows, not because they didn't believe in science, but because they still believed in something else too. Intuition, protection, the wisdom of old gestures. And maybe, deep down, they understood something we've forgotten. That some things, especially fear, don't need to be solved. They just need to be acknowledged. Met with a small act of quiet resistance. A pair of scissors, lying still in the dark, doing nothing, and somehow, doing everything. Today, that ritual has mostly faded, but you can still find echoes. In the way someone checks under the bed twice, or leaves a hallway light on, or whispers a prayer without thinking, or tucks an old object under the pillow, not for use, but for meaning. We still long for shape in the shadows, for something familiar in the unknown, something sharp enough to say, "This space is mine." Franklin had his air baths. Others had tea or candles. A few had scissors. Different methods. Same purpose. To keep the world from rushing in. To give the mind space. To hold a moment of control in a chaotic world. And now, you have yours. Maybe not iron beneath your pillow, but a quiet story in your ears. A breath that slows. A light that fades. A rhythm that calms. That's all ritual really is. A small, repeated act that makes you feel safe enough to rest. So maybe tonight, as you close your eyes, you'll remember the feel of cool metal tucked between linen and wood. You'll picture a woman in 1870 laying down her scissors before sleep, not out of fear, but familiarity. And you'll let that odd, beautiful logic carry you gently into the dark, because the world is still strange, still full of dreams, half-truths, and things we'll never explain. But you're still here, and the night is still soft, and somewhere, deep in the folds of time, someone just like you is slipping into sleep, with a silent protector at their side. Sleep well. You're not alone in your rituals, and the scissors are still sharp. Even now, even here.